Hey, it's Jeff Tamburello. I am director of the Southwest Florida, joined by the other director of the Southwest Florida, Mike Lyons. How you doing today, Mike?
Good, Jeff. How are you, man?
Good. Mike is going to be speaking about conflict resolution and property management at our luncheon, which is probably the reason why many people don't want to be in property management is conflict.
Very true.
So tell us about yourself, Mike. I want to tell the story of how I met Mike first.
Sure.
There's a house that's no longer a house now, 108 Williams. Peter Collar, who's one of the founders of the RIA, wholesaled it to me. I flipped it, sold it to a guy. That guy, about 5 years later, lost it to foreclosure. And I'm riding by and I see a Homevestors sign. And Mike at the time was in middle school, I think, and running a Homevestors franchise.
Just graduated elementary school, actually.
And so I call and you answered the phone and we start talking. And I ended up doing the mortgage for his buyer. And I think I made more money on that than I did on the flip. Because
a lot less brain damage, too.
Yeah, and then the irony, 3 years ago, I get a call through the RIA of a guy who had bought some of the tax liens. And by the time he applied for the certificate, the city had torn the house down.
May it rest in peace.
It's third time's a charm on a transactional basis for me, I guess. But the third time I ran into it, there's no more house there. I actually did the lion's share of the rehab. I don't think you guys had that much to do on it. We did a lot.
It wasn't bad. Although I guess how well did we do? Because they tore it down. So
yeah, good point. Well, the guy who bought it ended up kind of disappearing, got on drugs, and just kind of faded away. And anymore, the city of Fort Myers, if you leave a property vacant and it becomes vandalized, they get aggressive with it.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
So tell us about you, Mikey. How'd you get into property management? Why property management?
Okay, good question. Well, I've been in the real estate business investing side of things since 2002, basically, and sold investment property with Homevestors franchise, but had people ask when they bought the investment property, rental property, who's going to manage it? And I said, I'll do it. Really, when I was introduced, that was basically it. I said, I'll do it. I had no clue what to do, but, and that's how I started. And then obviously once the market kind of took a dive when it comes to sales and buying property, I thought people got to live somewhere. So grew the management portfolio and I've done it ever since. So since 2002, and I like it. I like handling it. I think my strength in it is that kind of conflict resolution and dealing with people, kind of just to let issues not get blown out of proportion, and pretty important in the property management thing. But from the investment side, I like the aspect of course, of buying and reselling of rental property, and then I've just done it for years now, and feel pretty good at it, and good with people, and it's worked out real well throughout the years. So
how many doors right now are you guys managing?
We're probably about the 450 range on doors, and growing, and want to continue to grow. Hopefully we'll have, more than that in the next few years, but there's to manage it effectively, it's got to stay within the systems that we have, and stay on top of the details. The details are one of the most important parts of property management. If you're not in the details, you lose control, and that's when bad things happen. So
yeah, it's really emotionally callous OCD people, I think, are the
optimal. That would be a great way to describe me. No, that's horrible. No, you can't. Well, that's to talk about that. You can't get emotionally involved in this stuff. You can't take stuff personal. People get pissed and they call and they're mad and they just vent. And by the time they're done, they're laughing, hopefully, and the issue is resolved. But one thing I found too in property management is people don't like hearing no. So when they want something done, they hear no, and then there's issues. So we'll talk about that.
So how do you remain emotionally detached?
That's okay. How do you, I always say, unless it's on fire or bleeding, it's not an emergency. So when people can call up and be all, upset about just sometimes really mundane things, in the big scheme of things, it's usually not a big deal and can be resolved one way or another. And sometimes they don't like the resolution per se, but it's never as big as a deal as it seems typically. So, for what it's worth, that's been the easiest way to go. Is this really a big deal? Because typically it's not. And just kind of keep a cool head, and pretty easy way to handle it. Kind of how we deal with RIA stuff. There's an issue and it get kind of heated, I take over.
Yeah, my passions tend to overwhelm from time.
Yeah, kind of cool.
I'm going to blame it on the ginger marine thing.
That's right.
So property management, what trait besides the, organizational, what trait makes a quality property manager?
Details are super important, and I don't think I'm super detail oriented, but I would say details when it comes to picking who's living in the properties that you manage has been the biggest key. So thorough background checks, just making sure you're putting in people that are willing to make their home or the property they live in their own, instead of this rental property and I don't want to fix stuff. If that's their approach, you don't want that. So tenants are kind of the key to the whole business. Tenant selection is a huge, probably the biggest and most important part. Doesn't mean you're going to get a bunch of tenants that are super nice by any means, but if they are willing to make it their own home and fix
That's
my
the thing. Crappy houses attract crappy tenants.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of times people will have a high turnover at one property, but it's that one property that they've put Band-Aids on, and they keep putting Band-Aids on, or they do very little, and it doesn't, a well-qualified person who takes into consideration where they're living and wants a nice place is not going to move into say a dump. But if it's not well managed or taken care of, you're not going to get a tenant. You're going to attract, if it looks good, you'll attract a good tenant. If it's in pretty rough shape, you're probably going to attract a pretty rough tenant.
Yeah. Well, if they're willing to settle to live there, you don't want them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If they walk in like, oh, this is fine, we can deal with this, then they're not going to take care of your property, obviously. But if you make it, and I work with several owners in the county and actually throughout the world even. I have clients that are out of the country and they own the property, they want it taken care of, and if they're willing to do what it takes to get a good tenant in, then the system works out great. I've had owners in the past I've worked with that weren't willing to do certain things, but they kept on having issues, and you had to kind of make it clear you're having issues because you're not getting the property as it should to attract the right people, and then the standards for getting a tenant stay the same. So then you have vacancies that are long because people can't qualify, or they just don't want the property because it's not in good shape. So upkeep of the property is important, and then getting good tenants that qualify is super important. So it's worked out good throughout the years.
What about screening tenants?
Most important by far. We talk about it at the meeting a bunch, but basically you have to do a nationwide background check, criminal background check, and you have to do a nationwide eviction search. Obviously, there's more to it than that. Work qualification and income and all that has to all be verified as well. But you have to check throughout the United States what's going on. And, when it comes to work-related stuff, you want to check their income and make sure that they didn't just start their job and they're not job hopping. So typically we look for 2 years at least at minimum in the same, if not in the same job, the same line of work with no gaps. If they're transferring from one job to another, it's the same, business and they've got stability, that's good. But even then, starting off in a new job is scary. There could be turnover. So we want stability in a job, and you want to verify their income not based upon what they tell you. You want to see a bank statement, a tax return.
Now the best one is the letter from my brother-in-law I work with.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, on they don't even have letterhead on it. Yeah, I don't accept that. I mean, that's obviously not. Or if they get paid cash, and there are businesses where they get paid cash, and I would pass until I have someone that can have verifiable income or put a huge deposit down. Huge, just offset. It's just like when you go to qualify for a loan. If you don't qualify, they ask for more money down. Same concept with property management. You have a tenant that wants to move into a property, they don't qualify, you ask for more money. Actually, we just got on a property, and it's a $1,000 rental. It's not high end by any means, but they didn't meet all the requirements, and one specifically was their income was short, and but they had money in the bank. So we asked for a $4,000 deposit, and they said, okay, we'll do it. And it was a nice home, and they wanted it, and it worked out. But you have more money, as security to handle if they were to either skip out or not leave the property as it should.
And they've got a heck of an incentive to keep it nice.
Absolutely, they want their money back. So yeah, no, that's a good. The more deposit you can get, the better, by far. Yeah, definitely. So
how about when is it time, Mike? When is it time to terminate a tenancy? At what point do you say no, thank you?
Oh, that's good. And I'll talk about it in the meeting, but your best friend can become what's called a 7-day notice to cure. So if there's something in the lease that they're violating, you can post a notice on the door that indicates if you do not fix this issue that's in violation of your lease, you can be evicted. And that works really, really well. Actually, I've never had to evict someone once that happens. But if they're not keeping up the place after you inspect the property, which is important, you need to be looking at the inside, not just driving by it. But if you're looking at the inside and they're not taking care of it, and you warn them upon being there, you need to do this, this, and this, and then you need to go back and re-inspect to make sure whatever issue it is handled. And if they're not willing, to do it, you check your finances on it, and if they're not if they're not taking care of the place, and you're also having an issue with collecting payment, perfect time to just non-renew them. I mean, I just wouldn't renew them when the lease came up. But and that's a tough question to be super specific on, because each kind of home and situation is different when it comes to the investor. They might need the tenant to be in there the next 4 or 5 months. They don't want a vacancy for a little while. But that can kind of depend. But if you have an issue with collecting payment and they're not maintaining the property, and after being told you need to do A, B, and C, or we're not going to renew it, if they still don't do it, then I just wouldn't renew them and move on. At the same time, my goal for people, my clients, is to keep the properties occupied, as long as possible, with good paying tenants, obviously. But if they're doing damage and or not paying on time, you get to a point where you cut your losses and move forward and get a new tenant. So, I mean, that's kind of the basic idea.
What are the traits of successful owners? So,
good point, or good question. The most successful owners that I work with, one, they don't put Band-Aids on repairs. If they're going to repair something and they have the goal of holding a property long term, and even if I say long term, I'm not talking about 30 years, but even if it's 5 to 10 years, they don't put Band-Aids on issues that are going to come up again soon, even within a year. So I don't know what kind of good example I could give you, but there's certain things you can do to a property when it comes to, for example, flooring. If a tenant, you have old carpet a few tenants later and it's time to replace it, if you're holding on to that property for investment purposes, put tile down. I'd never go back with carpet. Anytime you're going to hold on long term, why use carpet? Because it's never going to be brand new again. And tile, you can put down, seal the grout, and I mean, it'll look great for years to come. And so that's one way that's making a pretty successful landlord. And then the upkeep of it. I mean, every 5 to 8 years, I'd say, maybe even longer. You can extend it longer. But for example, paint the exterior every 10 years or so, 8 years, I'm guessing. And I say that might be not the norm for investors, but right now, a lot of the properties that we manage are 2005, 2007 built. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Yeah, the paint's pretty faded on that vintage by now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a lot of those houses are ready to be painted again from the outside. And if not, if you pressure clean them, that the powdery contractor paint that was on them years ago, it just looks rough. So I mean, that's one way to keep the property looking good, and then again, the appearance of a nice home attracts nicer tenants. And again, I'm not saying across the board paint all your properties if they're 2007 or older, but there's just certain things some property owners that I work with do to maintain their investment, and they're making it look nice and sharp for years to come. So when the time comes they do cash out, it looks good, and you're not having to spend $30,000 to get it up to par. It's already been maintained throughout the process.
We're seeing that on the brokerage side. There's some owners that have managed them minimally fixed stuff, and for them to try and exit, they're doing a full hardcore rehab to just bring it to an acceptable property for a buyer to buy.
Correct. Yeah.
And the degradation of 7 to 8, 9 years. This is one property we're working with right now. 7 to 8, 9 years of just what I call Band-Aids and minimal management. Yeah. It really catches up.
Oh yeah. In long term. But even there's a few things you can do too at turnover that aren't expensive, and I don't recommend this every time, but there's a few things you can do to kind of set the tone from the get-go of how you want your property treated. If they move into a property that's turnkey, looks good, clean, it's clean, it smells good, there's no Band-Aids, everything's fixed and done right, you have a lot better chance of getting that when the 2 years from now or 3 years from the tenant moves out. So even like pressure cleaning, for example, it might sound like unnecessary on an investment property, but you pressure clean the driveway and the exterior, it might cost you $200 to do it, $250, and you've got it. I mean, it takes a huge difference. That initial presentation with a home, even showing the property. So there's things you can do that long term you'll get your money back on, and then it won't be this huge rehab when the time comes for you to sell it. And I'm selling a bunch of property right now. I say a handful of properties of guys that are cashing out, and investors that are cashing out, and they bought right, they bought well, and they've got a lot of equity, and they're buying property in some instances in other states, acreage, land, that kind of thing. If that's their thing, but they've throughout the years done it right and repaired property, properly, and now it's not this huge expense to then get it up to par for its appraised for the highest value possible to sell it at the highest rate possible. So they're not having to spend $30 grand. They're spending $5 grand or $3 grand even. It just depends. If the house, for example, already all has tile and has been maintained well throughout the years, something tenant moves out, You paint it, you make it smell good, look good and clean, and pressure clean it, and you can get top dollar for it right now. And if you haven't done any of those things throughout the years, it's a big expense when it comes to selling. So there's things you can do throughout the years.
So what areas perform the best for buy and hold investors, in your opinion? This is just your opinion.
Well, you know what, and of course, this audience that could listen to this could be here locally in Lee County, Florida, or throughout the United States. But whenever you can buy a property that has city sewer and city water versus a septic system or well equipment to maintain water on the property, that's an expense that a huge expense you won't have to deal with down the road if you're buying property with those two things. Now, I'm not saying don't buy property with septic system or well equipment, but if you can focus on an area where the city utilities have already been established and they're in the property and you're getting a good return on your money once you buy the property and rent it out, I would focus on that over buying a property that doesn't have those options. Now, you might live in an area where that's just not an option. You're the property you're buying, you're in well and septic, that's your only option, and that it is what it is. But if you live in an area where there's in a decent medium income neighborhood where you can buy property with city sewer and city water, it just saves a bunch of expenses that you'd have otherwise. That's one of the big.
My opinion, you want to try and focus, like if it's a Lee County specific thing, on the unincorporated parts of the county.
Yes.
The taxes are so much cheaper, and actually that additional layer of government is an additional layer of brain damage.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think we all can attest to that. That's no fun.
Well, you look at the successful long-term property owners are the Shores, North Fort Myers, San Carlos, and Lehigh.
Yep. That's so true. And even then, I've got a few, and I say Cape Coral as well, if they bought right, and they've maintained it, they're also doing really well. I've got several in Cape Coral I manage that they did it right. I mean, they're maintaining their properties well. They don't put Bandaids on them, they fix them right, and then they get good tenants. Turnover kills cash flow for property owners. And if you can avoid that, a well-maintained home that's clean and fixed right, you'll have tenants for a lot longer. And again, cash turnover just kills cash flow big time. So the expenses associated with the vacancy, along with fixing the property up, are just a lot of money.
Cool. All right, Mike. Well, I look forward to hearing you talk about the conflict resolution and property management. And then hopefully soon we're working on getting all of code enforcement in one room. It would be just truly exciting. We could charge a lot more to be in that room, I think.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks, man. No, I'm looking forward to next week.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, man. Thank you. We'll talk to you later.